Imagine this. A man sits alone in a coffee shop. Around him, the world is frantically chasing noise. Fingers swipe, scroll, tap. Strangers glued to their screens are trying to be seen, liked, validated by people who don't know them and never will. Couples pose for curated moments. Friends gossip over each other. Lone individuals, desperate for connection, cycle through dating profiles like it's a lifeline. But this man? He's tuned out, earbuds in, listening not to the latest trends but to timeless philosophy. While the world numbs itself with TikTok and attention-seeking, he chooses silence, thought, reflection. He's not lonely. He's not seeking approval. He's not playing the game, and that makes him the most dangerous man in the room. But why? Why would a man content in solitude unsettle a society built on constant connection? Why does someone who doesn't flinch in the presence of his own mind unsettle those who can't sit alone without distraction? The answer lies in a hard truth we rarely confront. Society is terrified of the self-contained individual because he cannot be manipulated, sold to, guilted, or shamed. The social structure we live in thrives on neediness. Every dating app, self-help influencer, and corporate slogan is based on one assumption: you are not enough by yourself. Find your soulmate. Build your network. Stay connected. But what if that's a myth? What if the man sitting alone, content and complete, represents a rebellion so profound we've labeled him as broken, lonely, antisocial, or odd, simply because he's whole? Here's what I've come to understand. Society doesn't fear the man who can't be alone. It fears the man who doesn't need anyone. And throughout history, there have been men who embodied this unsettling strength. Take Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, ruler of the known world, yet a man who wrote not to others, but to himself. In his journal, he penned, "All cruelty springs from weakness." Despite commanding legions, he spent his nights alone, reflecting, questioning, refining his character. Or Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who saw through the illusions of modern life. He warned, "The individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe." Both men tapped into a dangerous truth. Those who are capable of solitude are the ones capable of original thought, and those who think for themselves? They are ungovernable. So what's really happening in the mind of someone who chooses solitude over superficial validation? First, they've broken free from the addiction to approval. While others chase likes, retweets, and viral dopamine hits, this person stands apart, anchored in self-respect that doesn't need applause. Second, they've made peace with discomfort. Most can't last 5 minutes alone without panicking, reaching for distraction. Silence reveals truths most people are terrified to confront. But the solitary thinker? They've faced their demons. They've endured sleepless nights where the only voice was their own. And they listened. They've learned to sit in the fire of their insecurities and emerge stronger. And finally, perhaps most powerfully, they cannot be manipulated. A person who doesn't need your praise cannot be controlled by your rejection. They can't be bought with popularity, nor silenced with pressure. They are immune to the currency of conformity. Marcus Aurelius trained himself in this discipline like a warrior sharpening his blade, not for battle against others, but against the chaos within. Each night, without fail, he turned inward, not to escape the world, but to confront it in its most raw and personal form. He examined his desires with ruthless honesty. He questioned every fear that had crept into his mind, exposing them to the light of reason. He scrutinized the moments he had sought approval and asked himself the uncomfortable questions. What did I crave today that I didn't truly need? What fear held power over me that I could have released? Where did I bend my character just to fit in? This was far more than idle journaling. It was a discipline, a deliberate act of spiritual resistance, like lifting weights for the soul. Marcus wasn't writing for posterity or public praise. He was wrestling with his ego, tempering his emotions and anchoring his values. In a world full of illusions and distractions, he chose self-confrontation over escapism. His journal became a mirror to the soul, a battlefield of thought, where his higher self emerged not through comfort but through clarity. What he was building wasn't visible. It couldn't be posted, shared, or applauded. It was silent strength, psychological resilience that cannot be faked or borrowed. He understood what few ever do. The person who knows themselves at the deepest level is incredibly hard to deceive, because they've already faced their own lies, they've already seen their shadow, they've felt the sting of their own weaknesses and stood back up. That kind of self-awareness renders you immune to many of the tactics society uses to control. Manipulation only works on those who haven't looked in the mirror. Guilt only sticks to those unsure of their own values. Shame only poisons those still seeking external validation, because our world, though masked in freedom, quietly depends on conformity. It thrives when you're dependent on praise, when you fear exclusion, when you're hooked on belonging. Systems, political, social, even spiritual, need you to seek something outside of yourself. But when a man no longer needs the crowd to feel whole, he becomes untouchable. You can't buy him because he doesn't hunger for more. You can't shame him because he's made peace with his flaws. You can't manipulate him because his clarity cuts through your illusions. This is why Marcus Aurelius, an emperor of unimaginable power, spent his nights in solitude, not intoxicated by his status, but anchored by reflection. He knew that true strength isn't the ability to command others. It's the ability to master yourself. And those who do, they don't just resist the system, they transcend it. Nietzsche pushed even further. He believed the truly dangerous individual was not only free from others' validation, but also bold enough to create their own values. Not inherited beliefs, not borrowed morality, but a code forged through solitude, reflection, and self-examination. To Nietzsche, this was the ultimate act of rebellion. To live by your own standards in a world that pressures you to conform. Most people are living lives shaped by values they never consciously chose. Their moral compass is a hand-me-down, passed to them by parents, peers, culture, and institutions. They believe what they were told to believe. They live according to rules written by others. They chase dreams they never questioned and defend opinions they never examined. These individuals aren't living their own lives. They're enacting someone else's script. But there's a turning point, and it begins in solitude. The person who dares to be alone starts to ask forbidden questions. Why do I believe this? Who gains from me holding this belief? What would I believe if I started from nothing? These questions mark the beginning of a dangerous path, because the moment you start thinking for yourself, you become unpredictable. You become ungovernable. You stop being a compliant consumer, a passive voter, and a docile participant in systems designed to keep you docile. Independence of thought is the first threat to a society built on blind agreement. To understand the true power of solitude, we must separate it from loneliness. Loneliness is a craving, a sense of emptiness, a belief that something essential is missing. It is a hunger to be completed by others. Solitude, however, is a kind of quiet strength. It is the ability to be whole while alone. It is finding calm in your own presence and stillness in your own thoughts. Our culture deliberately confuses the two because the lonely are profitable. They seek distractions, chase dopamine through consumption, and measure their worth through likes and followers. But the person who enjoys their own company doesn't need to buy comfort. They don't chase validation or numb themselves with noise. They think. And people who think are a threat to any system that relies on mindless obedience. After studying the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius and Nietzsche, I've identified 4 principles that make solitude powerful and threatening. The first is radical self-honesty. The person who embraces solitude learns to be brutally honest with themselves. They face their fears, desires, and flaws without delusion or sugarcoating. They can spot manipulation from miles away because they no longer lie to themselves. The second is value independence. Their moral compass is self-forged, not inherited from tradition or shaped by societal pressure. They are not immoral. In fact, they are often more moral because their ethics are grounded in truth, not obedience. This makes them dangerous because shame and guilt, the tools of control, lose their power. The third is emotional self-sufficiency. They don't rely on others to feel worthy or stable. They have learned to generate their own inner strength and peace. They're immune to emotional blackmail. And the fourth is intellectual courage. They think what others avoid. They challenge beliefs that most accept without question. They follow truth even when it isolates them. They speak what others dare not say. Such people can't be silenced, shamed, or steered, and that's terrifying to the status quo. But this path of solitude comes with a cost. Don't romanticize it. When you step outside the social hive, people will misunderstand you. They'll call you cold, arrogant, antisocial. They'll label your self-reliance as dysfunction. You will feel isolated, distinct from loneliness but heavy nonetheless. You'll recognize how differently others think, how deeply they're embedded in systems you've stepped away from. You'll lose relationships, especially those built on mutual neediness. Some friends will drift. Some family will feel threatened by your growth. Society itself will try to pull you back, with both subtle and overt pressure to be normal, to rejoin the herd. But while solitude has a cost, conformity has a far greater one. It costs you your authenticity, your inner voice, your soul. Why does society fear the self-sufficient? Because they don't feed the machine. Economically, a self-contained person isn't a compulsive buyer. They don't consume to fill voids, which makes them poor targets for advertising. Socially, they reject status games. If you can't control someone through prestige, you lose your grip on them. Politically, independent thinkers are dangerous. They can't be swayed by popular opinion or shallow rhetoric. And psychologically, your independence unsettles others. It exposes their dependence. Your calm makes their restlessness unbearable. Your freedom highlights their self-made cages. You become a mirror they're afraid to look into. So how can you cultivate this kind of powerful solitude without becoming bitter or disconnected? Start small. Carve out time to be alone without distraction. No phones, no background noise, just you and your mind. Begin with 10 minutes and let it grow. Practice evening reflections like the Stoics did. Ask yourself what went well, what didn't, and what you learned. Examine your beliefs regularly. Don't accept ideas just because they're familiar or popular. Create your own ethical framework, not based on what others expect, but on what is true to you. Learn to enjoy your own company. Find solitary activities that nourish your spirit. Walks, reading, creative work, thinking deeply. Stop chasing external approval. This is the hardest step. Let go of the need for applause, likes, and validation. Root your self-worth internally, not socially. And here lies the great paradox. The person who doesn't need others becomes the most attractive to them. When you're whole on your own, calm, confident, content, that energy draws others in. But the goal isn't attraction, it's integrity. The magnetism is a side effect, not the objective. Relationships built from solitude are stronger. When you don't need someone, your choice to be with them becomes a genuine act of love. Friendships become more authentic when they're born from joy, not from fear of being alone. Work becomes more meaningful when you're not performing for approval. Life itself becomes richer when you stop seeking outside confirmation for your worth and start living according to your truth. So here's the challenge. Become dangerous. Not in the sense of harming others, but in the sense of being ungovernable. Be someone who cannot be manipulated, bought, or silenced. Build a strength so solid that it doesn't collapse when others disapprove. Cultivate a mind so free that no lie can imprison it. The world desperately needs more people who stand rooted in themselves, people who don't flinch when left alone, people who can think clearly, live fully, and speak honestly, even when it's unpopular. If this message struck something deep in you, share it. You know someone who needs to hear it. And before you leave, ask yourself, what belief are you still carrying that isn't yours? Where are you still chasing validation instead of building self-respect? In a world obsessed with fitting in, the most radical act is to learn how to stand alone. Stay dangerous.